Hello everyone. This video is going to be a very essential resource for all of you in preparing for the GRE, as we will be covering the vocabulary based question type in great detail, particularly by covering the general strategy that can be used while approaching these questions. Now a quick recap of something I mentioned in the previous video. Vocabulary based questions are a part of the verbal reasoning section on the GRE. As you must be aware by now, the GRE is divided into three major sections: analytical writing, verbal reasoning, and quantitative reasoning. Of this, the verbal reasoning is what we are primarily concerned with as of now, and under verbal reasoning, the two major skill sets that are tested are comprehension of material via reading and vocabulary. So what we are concerned with today is vocabulary, and we will be talking about the general strategy that you should apply when attempting to answer questions of text completion and sentence equivalence, because they both come under the purview of vocabulary. So let's get into it. First of all, let me tell you what the types of vocabulary based questions are. If you followed my previous video, you will already be aware of this by now, that there are four types of vocabulary based questions: 1 blank text completion, 2 blank text completion, 3 blank text completion, and sentence equivalence. Needless to say, the first three mentioned here all form part of the bigger type called text completion, and the last one is a type in itself, which is called sentence equivalence. As you saw in my previous slide, these two right here. This and this. Okay. So these are the types of vocabulary based questions on the GRE, and if you've gone through my previous video, you will know that these questions care a great deal about your usage of words and your critical reasoning ability when you read through text that gives you partial information. Alright? So in both these question types, you will be given a passage or a text where part of the information will be missing, some words will be missing, and you will be asked to fill in those blanks in a way that meaningfully completes the whole. Alright, before we go forward with this video, let me give you a quick recap of the questions format, that is the structure in which you are presented with these questions. Text completion, the question format looks something like this, where you've got the text at the top, and the text can vary between 1 blank or 3 blanks. That's why the naming 1 blank, 2 blank, and 3 blank text completions. This is what the text is, right? This is your text or passage. A lot of people call it that. This is what you find at the top, and what you find below that are your options. In the case of 1 blank text completion, you are given 5 options. In the case of multiple blanks, that is 2 or 3, for each blank you are given 3 options. 1, 2, 3. Simple. That is the format for text completion. Now looking at the format for sentence equivalence, much of the same, but instead of 1 passage, you are given 1 sentence. Now note that in the previous example where I showed you text completion, right there, the same passage can have more than 1 sentence. Alright? Note that 1 sentence can span more than 1 line. Just because it's 1 sentence doesn't necessarily mean that you will only be given 1 line. For instance, if you look at this sentence ending on biosphere, starts from here, but it spans 4 lines. Alright? But in a sentence equivalence, typically, you will be given only 1 sentence. Alright? Now whether that sentence spans 1 line or 2 lines or more is really up to the text and the difficulty level. Alright? And typically for these questions you will only have always just 1 blank, wherein 2 answers will fit in. So in the case of sentence equivalence, you will have 2 correct answers. Alright? Simple enough. Now in the case of the submitting of answers here, usually you're presented with checkboxes which you will select. Whenever you see check boxes on the GRE, you know that it's a multiple entry question. That is, multiple answers can be correct. Alright? In the case of sentence equivalence, remember that it's always just the two answers, never more than two answers. Alright. Now I'm just going to get into the general strategy that I mentioned earlier to you. Now you must understand that to approach a text completion or a sentence equivalence, there is a basic strategy that you need to have in place. Because if you don't use a strategy, you will end up eating a lot of your time. Alright? There is a particular approach and particular order which is considered the most effective order. If you follow that order, chances are that you will reach your answer much sooner than you usually do. This is all about practice also. So ensure that once you're made aware of the general strategy, that is after this video today, please ensure that you practice this general strategy by going back on Leap and answering and practicing all the questions that we have up for you. Alright? So general strategy is a simple 3-step process, as you can see here. Step 1 is reading only the sentence. Now I've written sentence here, but you know what I mean. I mean the text. I mean the passage. And I basically mean the sentence in the case of sentence equivalence. So the part that is given at the top, if you remember what I showed you, this part or this part, that is the part I'm talking about. That is what you've got to read first without looking at the answer choices. So your first task is to only read the uppermost part. That is the text, the passage, the sentence. Alright? Next step is to find the target, clue, pivot, and fill in. Now these are very specific terms, so I'm going to describe to you what each of them mean. Alright? Let me begin with the target. Now target, as the name suggests, is the thing in the sentence that the blank is describing. And if you read the entire sentence or the entire passage or a part of the passage, because usually in a passage you might have more than one blank. So in the case of a long passage where there are multiple blanks, the part before the blank or after the blank that describes this blank is the target. Alright? The thing. So there is something that fits into this blank. That is the target. It is what is being described by this bit and this bit. Alright? So the target is the thing in the sentence that the blank is describing. It's not something that will fit into the blank. I'm sorry if you misunderstood what I said. It doesn't fit into the blank. It is something that this blank is describing. You will understand this better when we do a sample later on. Alright? Just remember what I said. The target is what the blank is describing. Alright. The next thing we're going to look at is the clue. Alright. The clue is what forces the contents of the blank to be perfectly predictable. Now, that just sounds like a lot of complicated stuff. But clue, what do you think clue might even mean if you look at it from a layman perspective? Well, it is the clue. It's going to give you a clue about what the blank might actually contain. So it is what forces the contents to make sense, to be predictable. So there'll be something in your sentence that will give you a clue as to what goes into the blank. That is exactly what the clue is. Alright? The pivot, next, is what determines the relationship between the blank and the clue. Not the target and the clue, the blank and the clue. That is what the pivot is. So pivot, as the name suggests, is something on which the entire crux of the sentence depends. I'll say it again. It is something on which the crux of the sentence depends. What is the crux? Simple. It is the relationship between the clue and the blank. How? Like I mentioned to you, the clue is what gives you an indication about what will go into the blank, right? So the moment you figure out the relationship between the two, that is, the relationship between the hint and the solution, what do you have? You've got the hinge, the crux of it all, the basic idea on which based on which you're going to find your answer. So your pivot is your relationship between your clue and the blank. Or in simpler words, the relationship between the hint and the solution. Simple? Alright. The next thing I'm going to tell you about is the fill-in. Well, that's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? The fill-in is nothing but your prediction of what might go into the blank. Alright? So it's something that you will predict before you can actually go and select your answer. Remember how I told you in the previous video that you must make yourself aware of what might fit in perfectly or appropriately into the blank. Alright? As you get the overall sense of the entire sentence or the text or the passage, whatever you want to call it, when you get the overall sense of it, there are certain predictions that will automatically come to your mind. So your fill-in is your prediction, which is your prediction in your own words, if you will. Something that you will keep in your mind before you approach your answer choices. Alright? Now you will get a better idea of all these four concepts when we actually do the step 2 in a sample problem that I have right after this. Alright. Last step of the general strategy is where you compare your fill-in to each of the answer choice. Simple enough, right? This is where the fill-in that you have predicted is to be compared with all the answer choices that are given. And if you have done a good job with your fill-in, you are likely to find a match. Alright? So let's get into the general strategy by actually looking at a sample problem. There it is. Simple one for a start. Let's have a look at it. Now this is a sentence that has got 3 lines and it's got 1 blank. So it's a 1 blank text completion. Alright? If you look at it, it's not very complicated. It just says that researchers have observed chimpanzees feigning injury in order to influence other members of the group, thus showing that the capacity to do something is not uniquely human. Now it's very clear, or if you're not very experienced with text completions, it may not be so, but ideally by now it should become very clear to you that this second part of the sentence is referring back to this first part of the sentence. So this part, essentially here to here, which is the first part, is related to the second part, naturally. This second part is actually referring back to this first part. Alright? How? Thus showing means that this is something that is showing this. That is the second part. So now if you read it again, you will understand that this is a quality that they are talking about in the first line. Chimpanzee's quality of being able to feign injury. It's a quality that they are talking about. Alright? It's a quality, it's a capacity. It's a way of doing something. Alright? So what do you think we'll get into this first? Let's look at it step by step. I've already given away quite a bit of the answer, I'm sure, for those of you who are intelligent. But I will still take you through the steps one by one. Alright? We're not going to look at the answer choices just yet, because step 1 of the general strategy is to read only the sentence. So what is the sentence? Let's read it one more time. Researchers have observed chimpanzees feigning injury in order to influence other members of the group, thus showing that the capacity to dash is not uniquely human. So this is something that I actually did in the very previous slide. I read through the entire sentence without looking at the answer choices. This is essentially your step 1. And when you do this, start evaluating and understanding what the entire sentence is trying to tell you. Like I mentioned to you, this second part is referring back to this first part. Alright? You've understood that. Alright? Now let's look at the second step in the general strategy, which is where you find your target, your clue, your pivot, and your fill-in. Alright? The fill-in has to come later on, of course. So we're going to cut that out of the picture right now. Alright? Just a second. So let's look at them one by one. What is our target? If you look at the sentence again, target was chimpanzees. Hang on, I'll just show you the sentence one more time for you for another read through. Alright? The target here is chimpanzees. Why? Because we are clearly talking about chimpanzees. And if you remember the definition I had given to you about target, a target is the thing in the sentence that the blank is describing. So now do you understand what I meant when I described it to you, when I defined it for you? What is the target? The blank is describing something in the sentence. Alright? So chimpanzees is the target. It's not something that goes into this. No, that's not what the target is. The target does not fill in the blank. The target is something that the blank is talking about. So the blank here is talking about chimpanzees, thus showing that the capacity to dash is not uniquely human. It is also talking about a capacity about the chimpanzees. So our target here is the chimpanzees, or rather a quality of the chimpanzees. So I'm going to make a correction here, and instead of saying just chimpanzees, let me just add quality, okay, or a capacity of chimpanzees. Simple. Next thing is the clue. Now if you remember, the definition I gave for clue is something that forces the contents of the blank to be perfectly predictable. Now how do you make the blank predictable? Well, let's read. The chimpanzee's ability to feign injury to influence others, an ability not unique to humans. If you read the sentence again, I'm not going back. If you guys remember in your mind, see, this is an ability that you have to develop. You can't keep constantly going back and forth, because in your mind you have to be quick. Of course, I'm taking you through things very fast, but keep understanding. You can't keep rereading the sentence again and again. You have to be quick with your catching. So if you remember the sentence, you remember that in the sentence they mention that this is an ability that is not unique to humans. Alright, so they're talking about the ability. So once again, you are made aware of the fact the blank is talking about the ability. So even though your target is the quality of chimpanzees, the clue here is their ability, and how that ability is similar to the ability of humans. Correct? Alright, now let's look at the pivot. What was the pivot? If you remember, the pivot is the relationship between the blank and the clue. Now this line, thus showing that, which was, if you remember, just before the blank, indicates that the activity that the researchers observed in the chimpanzees is indicative of a character trait in humans. Hence, the blank should agree with the clue. Now for this, I'm just going to take you back a step. Now read this part. Thus showing that the capacity to dash is not uniquely human. So we're talking about a capacity that is not human. Alright. So something that is not human will be chimpanzee-like. Right? So it will agree with it. See? It will agree with the clue. So the clue is the chimpanzee's ability to feign injury. So, because you are using the word thus showing that, you are trying to tell them, or your reader rather, that the activity that the researchers have observed is very human-like. So it is something that will agree with the clue, which is the chimpanzee's ability to be human-like. Does that make sense? I will repeat. So, the clue tells you about the chimpanzee's ability to be human-like. Alright? And the pivot, which is this language, indicates the chimpanzee's character trait to be human-like. Right? So clearly the clue and the pivot are on the same page. Right? Okay. So if that is clear, moving on to the fill-in. So your prediction for this will be something. Now the quality or the trait that is very human-like is the trait to be able to hide, or to be able to disguise, or to be able to feign, if you remember. This was a word that has been used in the sentence. Alright? It has been used in the sentence. So when you have the ability to feign something, that is a very human-like ability essentially, because animals don't usually possess it. So this is the quality that the blank is talking about. So your own version of the answer could be words like hide or disguise, or even feign for that matter. Why not? Alright, so now that you've got your fill-in in place, let's move into the next step. Compare to each answer choice. Now the answer choices that have been given are simple. Option A was cooperate. Cooperate means help or work together. A good idea would be to do this kind of a table where you simplify each word into the simplest possible word you can imagine. Alright? If you do this, then it is easier for you to understand if it fits into the sentence. It fits the bill, basically. Alright? So cooperate is when you help or when you work together. Clearly, we're talking about disguise and we're talking about feigning. So working together and helping definitely does not fit in, right? Next option is instruct. This is about directing, commanding. Again, it does not fit in because it's got nothing to do with feigning. Alright? Conspire. Well, conspire seems like a bit of a question mark because when you are feigning something or when you are disguising, you are actually doing something negative, right? So conspire does have a negative connotation, but the meaning of conspire does not quite add up in this sense. So we actually will eliminate this. Alright? Another reason why I put a question mark here is because some of you might find conspire a little bit of a complicated word. If you don't well enough, we can always move on. The next word is dissemble, which kind of actually is a little complicated, right? It's not a word we come across in our day-to-day lives, so a lot of you may not know the meaning of this word, which is of course the correct answer. It means to pretend or to feign. But in the case that you don't know this answer, you can always move to the next option, which is dominate. Clearly this does not fit in, right? Because dominate is to control, and we all know this word, mostly. So by elimination, when you rule out dominate, when you rule out instruct, and when you rule out cooperate, and then also rule out conspire because of your understanding of the word, automatically dissemble becomes your answer. Now something that you must learn to do as part of practice itself is when you practice all these questions on QS Leap, all the questions that we have for you, make sure that from every question you learn a new word. Just because you've got the word correct does not mean that you leave it at that. The moment you've got dissemble is correct, go back and understand what dissemble actually means and how it actually did fit into your answer, right? Once you do that, you will remember the word for future references, and that is somehow how you will end up building your vocabulary, even though you don't read tons and tons of word lists every day. So remember that your practice and your preparation for the GRE in a way will equip you for a better vocabulary for the final test day. So please ensure that you keep practicing and you keep collecting words in your vocabulary. Okay, so that's all for now. Please ensure, like I said, that you go back and you practice by all means, because without any practice, you're going to have trouble. And please make sure that you put down any comments in case you have any queries from this video, and ensure that you attend our live classes, which I've already mentioned in the previous videos. They're going to come around soon, and you're going to get the chance to interact with an instructor one-to-one, where all your queries can be resolved. Alright? So that's about it for now. Hopefully this video has done a good job in equipping you with the basic general strategy that you need to answer vocabulary based questions. Alright, I will see you soon when I do my next video. For now, goodbye.